Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and this is a breakdown of Joker Folie, Deux, the 2024 follow-up to the 2019 Todd Phillips film, starring Joaquin Phoenix as Arthur Fleck, a struggling comedian who becomes the Joker in his Elseworld version of Gotham, set in the early 80s. This sequel pairs Joaquin Phoenix as Arthur Fleck with Lee Quinzel, a take on Harley Quinn, played by Lady Gaga, in a musical. Folie Deux means a kind of shared madness between two people, and in this video, I'm going to break down this film, its controversial ending, details you missed, and what I think Todd Phillips was aiming to do with it as a musical that comments on society and the justice system in the style of the 2002 film Chicago. This film opens with a classic Warner Brothers animation bumper with the Leon Schlesinger Merry Melodies intro from the 1930s. This Looney Tunes style short is called Joker in Me and My Shadow. Animated shorts like this would often precede feature films in the early days of Hollywood, and it seems like that's what this film is kind of going for here. Now, the classic music that we all know is actually a song called Merrily We Roll Along. It's from 1935 by Eddie Cantor, Murray Mencher, and Charles Tobias. The lyrics are, "Merrily we roll along, my honey and me. Why we get along is easy to see." And when you consider this movie as a Folie Deux, even Merrily We Roll Along thematically fits with that. This short that we see in the beginning of the Joker sequel was animated by the company of Sylvain Chomet, the animator who created the amazing The Triplets of Belleville back in 2003. The short somewhat recaps the events of the 2019 Joker film, but really reimagines it as this little story of the Joker wrestling with his own shadow, much like Peter Pan. In some ways, Lee Quinzel is Arthur's shadow of this movie. We see this cartoon Joker arriving on the red carpet to the Franklin Theater, which is a reference to Murray Franklin, Robert De Niro's talk show host, whom Arthur killed on live TV in the previous film. The music that we're hearing is actually Slap That Bass from George and Ira Gershwin from the 1937 RKO Fred Astaire film Slap That Bass. This cartoon Joker goes down the theater hallway, passing various posters for famous movie musicals, including Sweet Charity, that's a 1969 Bob Fosse Neil Simon film, Shall We Dance, the 1937 Fred Astaire Ginger Rogers film, and Modern Times, the 1936 Charlie Chaplin film that really marked the last time Charlie Chaplin played the little tramp archetype character. And that film was being screened in the 2019 Joker film, the screening where Arthur Fleck snuck in as an usher and confronted Thomas Wayne. The cartoon Joker's shadow overtakes him and applies the clown makeup in the dressing room. On the mirror, you see written, "Put on a happy face," and behind him on the wall is a portrait of Robert De Niro's host, Murray Franklin, with blood stained on it. The shadow now walks out on stage singing Burt Bacharach's "What the World Needs Now Is Love," and it ends up becoming a kind of duet as the shadow sings and puppets around Arthur's beaten body, and then we have some cops running in the classic hup 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 cartoon style, and then they beat him to death, covering the screen with some cartoon blood. We transition to Arkham State Hospital, where Arthur was incarcerated at the end of the 2019 film. We hear a guard whistling "When the Saints Go Marching In," and this guard is Jackie Sullivan, played by Brendan Gleeson, Mad-Eye Moody from the Harry Potter films, and Oscar nominee for the Banshees of Inisherin. One could argue that Sullivan whistling this tune is what could inspire the inmates of Arkham to excitedly riot throughout the film while singing the same song. First out of the cell is Ricky Melline, played by Jacob Laughlin, the sweetest character in this film, who gets scapegoated, suffering perhaps the worst fate when Sullivan will later beat him to death out of rage when Ricky sings this song. Actually, many of the songs that Arthur and Lee Quinzel and all the inmates end up singing are kind of like classic jazz era romance songs that they really first hear from Sullivan's casual whistling throughout Arkham. Then we hear the deep cello notes of the Joker's theme from the 2019 film returning. These were composed by the Icelandic composer Hildur Guðnadóttir. I'm so sorry I mispronounced that. She actually won an Oscar for her music in that film. And we push in on cell E258 and we find Joaquin Phoenix as Arthur Fleck, his emaciated body holding his chamber pot to be emptied like all the other inmates are doing. This practice in the UK is called slopping out, and it was supposed to be abolished in England and Wales by 1996 and in Iceland in the years after, though supposedly it might still be done in Limerick prison. This practice is not really known to be done in the United States because most prisons were built in the 20th century and were built with indoor plumbing. Not the best conditions of plumbing, but not requiring people to empty out their own chamber pots. But I'm wondering, since Arkham State Hospital in this movie is depicted as being on an island like Alcatraz or Rikers or Blackgate Isle in the DC comics, it might be just a very, very old European style institution and might use a similar barbaric practice, at least in the E ward. Sullivan asks if Arthur has a joke for him today, as supposedly every day Arthur opens with a joke, but today of all days, Arthur has no jokes. In the 2019 film, an undercurrent of Arthur's life was really bad jokes and his uncontrollable tick of laughing. In this film, it seems like the way he has stifled that tick is through song. Arthur passes a break room area where on the TV we see Showbiz Bugs, the 1957 Bugs Bunny Daffy Duck short. To prep for his meeting with his lawyer, Arthur Arthur is shaved by the guards. The white shaving cream that they smear on his face likely reminds Arthur of the white clown paint he would smear on his face to become the Joker. And notice how the guard nicks his lip, and we focus on the blood trickling just a little bit. This foreshadows the final shot of the film as the blood seeps from the same corner of his mouth as he bleeds out after getting shaved. Now, while he's being shaved, we hear Jackie talking about one of the new guys who just randomly bit someone one day. I think he's referring to the young inmate that's played in this movie by Connor Story, the guy who ends up stabbing Arthur at the end of the movie. Sullivan tells a joke about a man who brought a dead dog to a priest for a funeral and was denied, and then offers $2,000 for the service, and the priest says, "Why didn't you tell me the dog was Catholic?" Arthur is led from this horrible E ward to the minimum security B ward. The umbrellas of the guards start out black, but when Arthur looks up at the rain, the umbrellas suddenly change into bright colors. This is an homage to a shot in the 1964 musical film The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. Arthur passes the B ward music class, where they are singing the Christian hymn "Will the Circle Be Unbroken," and he makes eye contact with Lee Quinzel, Lady Gaga, this movie's version of Harleen Quinzel or Harley Quinn. She wanders out of the hall to shout after Arthur, and she pantomimes offing herself. We learn later in the film that Lee is not required to be in Arkham. She checked herself in. She's a rich doctor's daughter with a psychology degree who's really faking her mental illness. A reveal that I will admit is closer to Harleen Quinzel's known origin as a doctor working at Arkham who falls in love with the Joker. But the fact that in this scene she can just kind of wander out of music class into the hallway kind of shows that the orderlies of this place don't really take her that seriously. They don't worry about her as a security risk or a flight risk. Catherine Keener from Get Out and a number of great films plays Marianne Stewart, Arthur's attorney. She preps him for an interview with Dr. Louis Beatty, a potential expert in his defense case, whom this lawyer hopes will be able to prove that the 5 murders Arthur was charged with, the 3 guys on the train, his clown coworker Randall, and Murray Franklin, that these killings were not committed by Arthur, but rather from another identity in his mind, a shadow self. This movie refers to his condition as potentially multiple personality disorder, but remember, this is also set in 1981. The better understood clinical term is dissociative identity disorder, or DID, and we don't call them identities or selves, we refer to them as alters. I do appreciate that this film starts to touch on how a 1981 legal system might try to categorize whatever Joker is, but ultimately just moves away from it and doesn't try to frame it within any known clinical category. Dr. Beatty asks if he sees bright lights, and I was just reminded of the mentally unwell prisoner from The Dark Knight, that movie's Joker had a cell phone bomb sewn into his gut.
He said he'd go inside and replace him with bright lights. Like Christmas.
And I only bring it up because this Joker movie ends with a very weird tie-in to Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight that I just did not enjoy. Arthur says that all he remembers about the night he killed Murray Franklin was the music. And I think this movie wants to imply that really the final act of the 2019 movie showed Arthur Fleck giving in to the musical elements of his delusion, from his dance down the stairs to the music of Murray Franklin's show. When Dr. Beatty asks to talk to the Joker, a spotlight rises on Arthur right here in the meeting room. So Todd Phillips' goal with this film seems to be to do a Joker film in the style of Chicago, Rob Marshall's 2002 Best Picture winner, which really was based on the 1975 Bob Fosse musical that adapted the 1926 play. And Chicago and its stage musical is really the story about the murder trial of Roxy Hart, an aspiring cabaret performer, and how she and her lawyer, Billy Flynn, are able to kind of tap dance through a corrupt criminal justice system to reach a not guilty verdict by any means necessary. That's Chicago. Now, the 2002 film used lighting shifts to smoothly transition in and out of settings like a prison or a courtroom and just kind of transform them into a smoky nightclub. And it was a really, really effective cinematic technique. This Joker movie seems to try to do a similar thing, but there are some reasons it's just not as successful. Chief among them, why does this need to be a movie set in the universe of DC characters? The cynical economic answer is if you're Todd Phillips, making something connected to a major IP is the only way you're gonna get it made for a certain budget. I get it. I understand the economics of it. It just makes for a very mismatched and misaligned and confusing cinematic experience. Because while the 2019 movie, at least you could say, had like Alfred in it and a young Bruce Wayne, this movie gets even further away from this being in Gotham. We see that Arkham in this film is connected to Gotham via a long curved bridge, which I gotta say is completely impractical. Like, there's no way city leaders would ever allot resources to building a whole freaking bridge just for the staff staff who work at a facility for the criminally insane on a little island. Like cities build bridges for thousands of commuters to get to their home, to work, back to wherever they need to go every day. It's a huge investment to build a bridge. They wouldn't build a bridge to Arkham. But Jackie references a made-for-TV movie about Arthur that everyone saw. Sounds like there was a TV special that restaged the events from the first movie. I guess they're trying to say this is like Ryan Murphy's The People vs. O.J. Simpson, or Ryan Murphy's Dahmer, or Ryan Murphy's Monsters about the Menendez brothers. But we never see in this movie what that TV movie was. Jackie takes Arthur to the music class where we see they're singing Get Happy by Harold Arlen and Ted Koehler, most famous from Judy Garland's rendition from 1950 Summer Stock, her final MGM film. Get Happy was the original Merry Melodies intro music from 1931 to 1933. That's why when you watch some of those Looney Tunes, they actually begin with now, in the way that some people theorize that all of the first movie could have been in Arthur's head, Fight Club style, a case I think could be made that this entire trial is a merry melody in Arthur's mind. From the frequent early Hollywood jazz songs featured in this film, to the recurring Warner Brothers animation shorts on the TVs, to the fact that the movie ends with Arthur going to see a visitor and we never know who it is. Could it be actually his lawyer prepping him for trial? I don't know. Maybe all of this is actually the Looney Tune of Me and My Shadow. Arthur talks with Lee for the first time, and I don't know if it's coincidence, but taken together, Arthur and Lee form the first two names of the primary suspect believed to be the Zodiac Killer, Arthur Lee Allen. Lee, of course, spelled differently there. Lee goes back to singing Get Happy, and together they softly sing the parts of it where it's sing hallelujah, come on, get happy, get ready for the judgment day. Now, this is Lee's form of encouragement. She wants Arthur to get happy and giddy ahead of his literal day of judgment, but also considering that he dies at the end of this movie, he is facing a final judgment in other ways. On the TV, they see a press conference from Assistant DA Harvey Dent, played in this movie by Harry Lottie. This is the latest film, Harvey Dent, after Billy D. Williams, Tommy Lee Jones, and Aaron Eckhart, though Lottie said that he didn't watch any of those performances so that he could have a fresh, young prosecutor that wasn't affected by any of the takes in the past. Dent plans to seek the death penalty, he says. Now, Gotham City is known to be in the state of New Jersey, which outlawed the death penalty in 2007, but this is in the early 80s. Arthur responds by singing a cappella For Once in My Life, the 1965 Motown song written by Ron Miller and Orlando Murden, best known for its up-tempo cover by Stevie Wonder, but originally written as a slow ballad, which is how Arthur sings it here. Todd Phillips keeps the camera on Joaquin Phoenix without cutting away. As the instrumentation kicks in, we see another inmate pantomiming the piano, and the young inmate, who will stab Arthur by the end, is leaning against the back wall, just kind of bobbing to the music, waiting for his time to take over. But the musical reality breaks when we cut back to Arthur being asked if he's scared, and we cut back to Arthur still looking at the TV, smoking. So all this, even his ability to know all the words to this song, was just in his head in this moment. Arthur signs a book for a guard, The Night the Laughter Died by Gene Ufland. Gene Ufland was Murray Franklin's show producer, played by Mark Maron in the 2019 film. You can see his very serious author photo on the inside sleeve, so we see how Gene is cashing in on the drama like everyone else is. Arthur was gonna write Put on a Happy Face, but he crosses it out and writes I hope you get cancer, smiley face. They watch a movie screening of The Bandwagon, a 1953 MGM film starring Fred Astaire and Sid Charisse, directed by Vincente Minnelli, Judy Garland's husband for 6 years and father to Liza Minnelli. This is a scene where the song That's Entertainment plays, and we hear Fred Astaire singing a clown with his pants falling down, or the dance that's a dream of romance, or the scene where the villain is mean. That's entertainment. Now, the lyrics actually kind of describe what happens in this movie. The clown making a fool of himself, and specifically his pants are off when Jackie and the other guards drag him back to his cell. The dance that's a dream of romance is really what he's doing with Harley Quinn throughout this movie. It's a dream of romance, not a real romance. And a scene where the villain is mean. Arthur is pretty mean to Gary when he cross-examines him. We also hear the lyric in the background of the scene, it could be Oedipus Rex, where the chap kills his father and causes lots of bother. And just a reminder that in the first film, Arthur believed his father was Thomas Wayne and wanted to kill him. Lee starts a fire in the piano, and she and Arthur stay behind in this pretty cool shot of them directly in the beams of the film projector, like they are trying to beam themselves into a film reality. They sing If My Friends Could See Me Now. This is from Sweet Charity that we saw a poster of back in the animated intro. This song was originally sung by Gwen Verdon, who is Bob Fosse's longtime partner, and in my opinion, the more talented of the two. Actually, watch FX's Fosse Verdon. It's gonna break down a lot of this Broadway ancestry for you. Now, we see how this movie transitions into musical sequences in two different ways. The first category is characters singing known Hollywood and Broadway show tunes in the context of the scene, justified as these characters just kind of singing or humming to themselves and then kind of flailing about their spaces. The second category is the true classic musical style, characters transporting into imaginary dream world stages with glitzy lighting and sets and costumes, as we are now in a full-blown musical. I like how in this film, generally, we heighten blatant from the first category to the second category. The problem with the way this movie approaches the musical structure is it just has way too much. Too many reprises of too many of the songs. Like a good musical could pick one song or one motif and they reprise it just once or maybe twice to show the character's evolution throughout the film. Like callbacks are a big thing in musicals, but you are precise about the way you do it. What this movie does is it brings back like 5 of its classic songs and it reprises them at least like 5 times each. So it just feels really redundant and it just really starts to drag in the second half because each time you reprise it, it just saps away more of the meaning and we don't really know why we're hearing the full version of the song every time. Me and every single person I know has at some point in their life been living paycheck to paycheck. It's so stressful and every little extra expense from a parking ticket to a sick pet or a utility bill that's higher than usual just becomes a big deal. In times like that, having a banking app that can get you a little cash between paychecks can be a lifesaver. And that's why my banking app of choice is Dave. Dave is the banking app that's leveling the financial playing field. When you download Dave, you could get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. No credit check, no late fees. It's part of Dave's extra cash account. Advance the money you need with no interest. Extra cash gives you the wiggle room you need to buy groceries, fill the tank, and pay rent without having to wait for your next paycheck. And if you have an advance, you can get it instantly when you transfer it to your Dave checking account. If you're in a pinch, get the help you need by downloading Dave. Download Dave today at dave.com/newrockstars. That's dave.com/newrockstars. You can get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less when you download Dave. No credit check, no late fees. Download the Dave app now or go to dave.com/newrockstars. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Eligibility criteria and instant transfer fees apply. Banking services provided by Evolve, member FDIC. But Arthur, while in solitary confinement, imagines himself and Lee dancing atop the Hotel Arkham. Literally dancing with the devil in the pale moonlight, you could say. It's a waltz, an original song composed by Lady Gaga called Folie à Deux. And it's great to hear an original song in this musical. You know, it'd be great if it all could have been original, but you know, I get it. The Arkham has a vacancy sign, you'll note, and I just like that little detail because it's like saying, hey, more room for Rogues Gallery villains if you guys want to show up. While in solitary, Arthur wakes up to find Lee there with him. She says the guards let her in because she was being released. She promises that they're going to build a mountain, referring to the 1962 Sammy Davis Jr. song that comes back later throughout the film. And this scene where they have sex is crazy to me. Was it all imagined by Arthur? Probably, right? The whole pregnancy subplot seemed to be imagined all in Arthur's head. I just can't imagine why the guards would let someone who just checked herself in into a solitary confinement cell with a violent criminal currently on trial. Arthur does an interview with TV host Patty Myers, played by Steve Coogan. He's a Tom Snyder, Geraldo Rivera type back when they would do these types of interviews in the 80s. Arthur starts off okay, but Patty goads him and then Arthur gets hostile. There's a lens flare that causes a red circle to appear on Arthur's chin, and we're reminded again of the drop of blood from the shaving cut. With blood in his mouth now, he shows a similar aggression to Patty as he did to Murray, even calling him Paddy, the same repeated underlined way in which Joaquin Phoenix kept repeating Murray right before he killed him in the 2019 movie. Then Arthur sings Bewitched, Frank Sinatra song that was actually transposed from a female sung version, Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered by Hart and Rogers for the 1940 musical Pal Joey, a version that you might have heard sung by Ella Fitzgerald. Lee, watching on TV through a storefront, does the right thing and throws a trash can through it. And as Arthur is driven into Gotham City, among the buildings in the skyline is one labeled Wayne for Wayne Tower. Arthur is driven to the courthouse surrounded by supporters wearing Joker masks with signs reading things like Free Joker. At the door leading to the courtroom, light beams through like the lights of a stage. The bailiff even opens the door saying, okay, showtime. Arthur is totally seeing this courtroom as a theater stage. Very razzle-dazzle Chicago. Because doors that lead to vents in the courtrooms don't have like round windows like this. They're not restaurants' doors that like swing open between the floor to the kitchen that you have to be able to peek through. Harvey Dent calls Dr. Lou, played by Ken Leung, Maelstrom from Lost, as a witness to refute Arthur being insane. Marianne cross-examines and questions whether Dr. Lou looked at his and his mother's medical records that detailed the physical and sexual abuse that Arthur suffered. During this part, we see inserts of the file with all the medical records, the photos, the news clippings about that from the 2019 film that Arthur had read through. And I thought the news clippings were always very weird because why would this rise to the level of being printed in the newspaper? Like, especially the very specific details when it comes to crimes against children. There are journalistic standards to show how you talk about that in the newspaper. And I just thought it was a weird choice to have like news clippings about it in the 2019 film. And we hear the subway gunshots again. And on the third one, Arthur flinches. Now, one of the details we used to speculate that the 2019 movie could have all been in Arthur's mind was the fact that he fired a 6-shot revolver 8 times without reloading. And we looked at it, it was not an 8-chamber revolver, it was definitely a 6-chamber revolver. Sharon Washington returns in the first film as Deborah Kane, Arthur's social worker, and she reads from his diary. Only because Arthur dated the entry with November 17th, the day Arthur killed Randall and Murray, could Dent admit it as evidence. The entry reads, "I almost never dream, what do I gotta do to remember?" And we see a new shot inserted in this film that would have taken place after Arthur killed Randall, but before he went on Murray's show. Music really seems to be this movie's answer to how Arthur can remember his dreams, because while dreamed images and words often fade from our memories, music is something that sticks with us. Marianne reveals to Arthur that Lee has actually been lying to him, that her father is not dead, he is a doctor, and she lives with both of her parents on the Upper West Side. This is a classic example of the cult runaway. They often come from privileged upbringings. One thinks of Patty Hearst's involvement with the Symbionese Liberation Army. And we transition to another soundstage, the Joker and Harley show, made to look like the Sonny and Cher variety show in the 70s. They sing 1967's To Love Somebody by Barry Gibb and Robin Gibb. Yes, the Gibb brothers from the Bee Gees, the ones from SNL's The Barry Gibb Talk Show. The words, "You don't know what it's like," really came from Arthur telling Marianne that she wouldn't understand their love. Lee turns away and starts soloing, though, and Arthur stops singing. The music stops as Arthur teases her for making it all about herself, and then she pulls out a gun and shoots him. So really, his sweet dreams with Harley have now been corrupted by this nagging suspicion. Arthur confronts Lee about her lies to him, and she owns up to it, but she finishes with yet another lie, saying that she's pregnant. And she sings Burt Bacharach's "They Long to Be Close to You." It's her way of justifying that these pestering, noisy birds flock to attractive people just to be in their aura. Lee, describing herself as a bird this way, recalls how we have in the past seen Harley Quinn as one of the birds of prey. Now we get the iconic shot of this movie where Lee draws a smile and lipstick on the glass, and the camera focuses to line up perfectly Joaquin Phoenix smiling so that he smiles just right to fit the arc that was previously drawn. An impressive practical accomplishment of blocking and perfectly timed focus pulling. Kevin McCarthy asked Todd Phillips how they pulled it off.
It was harder than it looks because of what you just said, lining it up. But what we basically did was we put a little bit of a grease pencil mark where he would line up to where she had to hit, and then he knew to sort of just do this, and it was, you know, it was actually, it probably took an hour, and I was sweating it because I'm going, oh, if this does end up being cringy, we're just like wasting an hour trying to get this thing, you know?
So yeah, they made a grease pencil mark on the exact arc of Joaquin Phoenix's smile, which would be slight enough that they could remove it in post-production before Lady Gaga's hand would draw the lipstick over it. And then they did this take over and over and over again for about an hour until they got the exact shot in which Joaquin Phoenix could lean just slightly enough into position to fill the lipstick smile. And symbolically, it's a really effective way to show how Arthur doesn't want to play into society's perception of a raging clown. Smiling is really a blood red path that this unhinged society is drawing for him to obediently follow. Zazie Beetz returns in this film as Sophie Dumont, but didn't return in Deadpool and Wolverine as Domino, which was kind of weird. She testifies that Arthur's mother, Penny, to help young Arthur through his laughing condition, made up a story that God put him on this earth to make people laugh, which led to Arthur pursuing his career as a stand-up comedian despite not really being funny. Arthur disassociates and transitions into a version of The Courtroom lit with Chicago nightclub-style lighting, where he sings The Joker by Leslie Bricusse and Anthony Newley from the 1964 musical The Roar of the Grease Paint, The Smell of the Crowd. Arthur slams a stool on Harvey Dent, and like he imagined in the Arkham exercise yard, he starts shooting around the room, aiming specifically for the press camera operators. He picks up an oversized gavel and violently clubs to death Judge Rothwax, and then offs himself at the end of the song. Waking up from this reality, he decides to fire Marianne and represent himself. On the ride back to Arkham, we hear Stan L. Brooks on the radio. This is the same radio announcer from the 2019 film, and it's a nod to Stan Z. Burns, radio announcer of New York's 1010 WINS. Throughout the 80s, his broadcast ends with a brief mention of Mayor Thorndyke, who's one of the many past mayors of Gotham City mentioned throughout DC Comics. This one showed up in flashbacks from the Maid of Wood storyline in 2003. We see Lee walking back to Arthur's old neighborhood up the same steps that he danced down in the 2019 film. This is actually in the Bronx, connecting Shakespeare and Anderson Avenues at West 167th Street in the Highbridge neighborhood. Arthur, now representing himself with his Joker makeup fully on, faces Gary Puddles, the former co-worker and witness to Arthur killing Randall in the 2019 movie. Arthur's cross-examination of Gary transitions through various different character personas. First as a proud Southern lawyer, and then when he lowers his voice to talk to the judge, takes on this New York mobster voice. And then when he gets real close to Gary, he uses an English accent to mock Gary.
Maybe You don't know who I really was.
Gary doesn't let him walk away from this. He tearfully shames Arthur for making him feel small and powerless. And for once in this movie, Arthur realizes that he is not the victim of all of this. Gary is an example of one of the many people who have been hurt and continue to hurt based off of what he has done. The state rests their case, and Arthur decides to rest his. He calls no witnesses. So Lee and Arthur start to go into a musical interlude, singing Sammy Davis Jr.'s Gonna Build a Mountain with an up-tempo gospel beat. They walk out together toward the back doors. Even though, think about it, Arthur would still go back into custody, right? So we must be slipping into a musical fantasy, which we do. We go into another dream set with Arthur and Lee's wedding day, where Gary is forced to be the ring bearer. Now, I think it was in this transition where this shot from the trailer was removed from the movie. This is one of many shots that you might have noticed in trailer footage that did not appear anywhere in the film. But this must have been part of a musical dream sequence, because that's why the newspaper reads, "Free on all charges." That would not be how a verdict would be reported in a newspaper. Now, a detail that I really like about this wedding chapel set, there's a curvy footbridge over water that leads to the altar. The altar is an island, which I think is meant to represent the curved bridge that leads to Arkham's island. The wedding transitions to an after party at Pogo's. Remember, Pogo's was the comedy club where Arthur did his stand-up in the 2019 film, and it was named after the clown persona of the serial killer John Wayne Gacy. Jackie beats Arthur back at Arkham, stripping him down and triggering his childhood abuse from his mother's boyfriend. Back in a cell block, Ricky sings in support when the Saints go marching in, and Arthur listens as Jackie strangles Ricky to death. And in this moment, Arthur flashes back to the subway bathroom from the first movie when he first danced to celebrate his killing of the guys on the train, because now Arthur once again feels like he has blood on his hands. So between Ricky and between Gary are just two people for whom Arthur's continued antics are bringing pain and suffering. Lee applies her own Harlequin diamond patterns on her face. On the steps of the courthouse, we see that her outfit includes Harlequin diamond patterns on the jacket, on the corset, and on the pants. I think it was hearing Ricky die that led Arthur in his closing statement to claim that there is no Joker, there's just him, and that he killed 6 people, including his mother. He says, "I just want to blow it all up and start a new life." Choice words to say to a violent mob that's listening outside. Lee leaves. Arthur leaves a voicemail for Lee, singing 1959's "If You Go Away" by Jacques Brel, English lyrics by Rod McEwen. And when the verdict is read, Arthur has now wiped his clown makeup off of his face, and we hear the verdicts. Count 1, guilty. Count 2, guilty. Count 3, guilty. And on this third one, a man who I assume is the father of one of the guys on the subway lunges at Arthur. Chaos fills the courtroom. Judges banging the gavel, and then boom! An explosion rocks the courtroom. The later radio broadcast would claim this was a car bomb, which would mean most of the casualties outside would have probably been Joker supporters. The news camera is broken. The bailiff is dead. Arthur somehow still alive. He gets to his feet, and the camera swings to Harvey Dent, and hey, half of his face is scarred by burns. He's still in shock. Of course, canonically, Two-Face's face is scarred by acid thrown in his face by Sal Maroni during a murder trial. In Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, it was burning fuel from a trap bombing set by the Joker's gang. We do not cut. The camera is handheld and follows Joaquin Phoenix through all of this. Maybe there were some cuts hidden in the smoke, but we can't be sure. Arthur is found by another supporter who's dressed more like the Joker than he is. He puts him in his car, and they're driving, celebrating. And it's just crazy that we're still in the car. Todd Phillips has not cut away yet. Even when the car stops and they have to get out, and it's a foot chase now, even when those clowns get hit by police cars, we're still all in one handheld take, and it's pretty impressive. Arthur runs back to his home neighborhood, finding Lee on the steps. She's cut her hair, and Lee says, "All we had was the fantasy, and you gave it up." He brings up their baby, but Lee doesn't answer. She just sings, "That's entertainment," implying that she made up that too. Arthur is taken back into custody. He watches a Pepe Le Pew short, somewhat reflective of his situation, a lover chasing after an uninterested lady whom he thinks is the one just because she has white paint on herself. Jackie tells Arthur he has a visitor. Now, notice how Jackie leaves Arthur alone in the hallway for far longer than he's ever left him alone. I kind of feel like Arthur did not really have a visitor, and Jackie just set him up to be shivved. The young inmate catches up to him to tell him a joke. A psychopath walks into a bar and sees a famous clown sitting there all alone, totally drunk. It's pathetic. "I can't believe you're here," he says. "What a disappointment. I used to watch you on TV. What can I get you?" The clown turns to him and says, "Well, if you're buying, you can get me anything." "Perfect," the psychopath says. "How about I get you what you f***ing deserve?" Which, of course, is exactly what Arthur said to Murray right before he shot him. And the young inmate stabs him to death. Arthur collapses and flashes back to Joker and Harley singing "Gonna Build Me a Mountain," specifically these words: "I wanna find young son to take my place. I'll leave my son in heaven on earth with the good Lord's grace." The implication being that Arthur is now, in a way, passing the torch of the ultimate psychopathic Joker to a younger generation to take his place. As Arthur bleeds out, blood drips from his mouth, the same place as it did in the opening scene when he was shaved. In the background, we see the young inmate using the knife to cut his own face, giving himself a Glasgow smile. So, it would appear that Todd Phillips wants to at least reference Heath Ledger's Joker from The Dark Knight, who had similar scarring, scars with a never revealed backstory, because Christopher Nolan and Heath Ledger's Joker embraced the multiple choice origin story from Alan Moore's The Killing Joke. I'm pretty sure Todd Phillips cast Connor Story for his uncanny resemblance to a young Heath Ledger. Now, I don't think Todd Phillips intends on this guy being exactly Heath Ledger's version of the character. The timeline wouldn't match up. This story's in the early 80s, The Dark Knight is set in the late aughts. But the fact that this movie's even referencing a film and a performance that DC fans consider to be sacred feels, for lack of a better term, pretty tone deaf. If you want your Joker to exist in its own Elseworld, that's fine, but don't confuse viewers by linking it to one of the most iconic Batman films, and for many people, their favorite Joker. So that's where this film leaves us. Good riddance, Arthur Fleck. We saw some fine performances from Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga, impressive camera work by Todd Phillips, an interesting trip down Hollywood symphonic history, some interesting commentary on America's obsession with true crime and legal drama, but it all just came together kind of like an orchestra full of first-chair musicians, each playing from completely different pages of sheet music. But what did you think of Joker Folie Deux? Comment down below with your thoughts. Follow me at EA Voss. Subscribe to all 3 channels of the new Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.